Welcome back to the Thinking Ape podcast. And today we have a very special guest, a man who needs no introduction, but I have a little introduction anyway. So the Honourable Michael Kirby. The Honourable Michael Kirby is an international jurist, educator, and former judge. He served as a Deputy President of the Australian Conciliation and Arbitration Commission, Chairman of the Australian Law Reform, Judge of the Federal Court of Australia, President of the New South Wales Court of Appeal, President of the Court of Appeal of Solomon Islands, and Justice of the High Court of Australia. He has undertaken many international activities for the United Nations, the Commonwealth Secretariat, the OECD, and the Global Fund Against AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. He has also worked in civil society, being elected President of the International Commission of Jurists. His recent international activities have included member of the Eminent Persons Group on the Future of the Commonwealth of Nations, Commissioner of the UNDP Global Commission on HIV and the Law, Chairman of the UN Commission of Inquiry on North Korea, and member of the UN Secretary General's High-Level Panel on Access to Essential Healthcare. He's also heavily engaged in international arbitrations, domestic mediations, and teaching law. He's honorary professor at 12 Australian and overseas university, and he's kindly gobbled up his dinner quickly to have time to speak with me tonight. So thank you so much, Mr. Michael Kirby. And the first thing I probably want to know is what got you into law? I'm sure you get asked this all the time as well.
Well, I do get asked every now and again, perhaps by people who are astonished that a person as intelligent as myself went into law. But when I was at school, I was really good in English, in history, in debating, in acting, and that combination of talents, rather than a sort of mathematical and scientific stream, really led naturally to the law. I also attended public schools. All my schools were public schools, and my leaving certificate was done at Fort Street High School, which is the oldest continuous public school in Australia. And they had a lot of judges in their alumni, and they would sometimes come along and speak to the students. And I thought, that sounds very interesting, very dignified. I'd get a lovely uniform, robes and all that. And so that appealed to me, and I then started to study law, and that led to the appointments that you mentioned at the outset.
Did you ever consider a career in acting, if you like drama?
Are you suggesting I didn't have a career in acting?
A different way.
I didn't actually think of full-time life as an actor, though my father I had a wonderful father and mother, and my father gave me sets of records of Shakespeare's plays and poems and so on. And I'm like Rumpole of the Bailey. I can go around speaking the lines of all these wonderful great minds that have written the poetry and drama of our language. And that is a sort of performance. Like Rumpole, I just bring them out whenever they're relevant or not relevant and give me pleasure. I love poetry.
Oh, would you say that's something you do in your downtime? If you have any downtime, that is?
Well, I don't have very much downtime, unfortunately. I have been pressured by my partner, Johan, to give up one day a week. I've never done that in all of my life since I became a judge back in 1975, but now I'm forced to give up Thursdays.
Thursdays is your day off?
It's the day off, and we go shopping. I wheel a trolley in the supermarket, and we buy various things. The Economist, London Review of Books, and then I come home and tuck into those. And that's a sort of escape from a life, or a life mainly in the law.
What would you say your favorite book has been?
Well, I would probably, boringly enough, have to say it has been Shakespeare, because having been introduced to it by my teachers, having acted out a scene from Richard III in the drama festival that they had every year at school, and having received these recordings and books on Shakespeare, it's a marvellous, deep and a rewarding area of drama and literature. But if I'm left to myself, the things that I mainly do are read books on history. I often think I would have done better to have been a professor of history, because I love history. And for example, at the moment, with the Ukraine-Russian conflict, you can't really understand that without understanding the history of the moves in the world to self-determination of peoples and the exchanges of population that principle led to after the First World War, before the Second World War, thereafter. And if you know the history, you can at least partly understand the motive forces that are going on in the world today. So there it is. I did well at the Leaving Certificate in History. I love it. And when I have a book that is on history, I'm very happy.
Do you have a favorite time period in history? For me, I liked like revolutionary Russia, that kind of period. We learned that in school. I was a massive history nerd. I still am. That period I was always interested in.
Well, it is a very interesting period, and the way most unpromising revolutionary Lenin got to take charge of the Bolsheviks and led on to overcome the 400-year history of Tsarist rule and the White Russian war to try to prevent him taking power, and then had to deal with a very strange group of people, is really a very interesting story. And Mr. Putin thinks that was the best time for the Soviet Union, the establishment of power and respect. And when you read about the importance of that time for the present conflict in Ukraine and Russia, you understand how a lot of the things that have emerged in the present days, the last 40 days, have emerged from the history and the provisions made for the Soviet Union and the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and all those borderland satellites which Russia, always fearful of invasion and enemies, put in place around its border and then lost very rapidly at the end of the Cold War in 1989-91. And this is what is disturbing the psyche of Vladimir Putin. And this is why he's plunged us into this really shocking and disproportionate solution to his problem. How do I get back the point where everybody feared and respected the Soviet Union? How does the Russian Federation, my beloved country, reassemble that situation? And how can I do it at minimum cost? Well, that hasn't proved quite so good.
I had someone on my podcast previously who is considered an expert in like Russian history, and he predicts that right now Russia will take Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, if not already, and I think Georgia. He said all the non-NATO countries, and that's what his prediction is, which is pretty depressing. But we'll see what happens, I guess.
Yes, we don't really know, but lurking in the background is a great danger to the human species, namely the fact that a number of powers, the P5 and 4 others, have developed this nuclear stockpile, which is so very dangerous. Dangerous because of deliberate actions, but also dangerous because of mistakes and accidents. Given that in those stockpiles is the capacity to destroy the whole world, the planet, many times over.
Exactly.
It's really a shocking indictment of humanity that in the 50 or 70 years now that we've had these weapons, that we haven't managed to reduce their number, radically reduce their number, control more effectively the number of countries that are getting their own nuclear weapons, and ensure that the weapons are put under international control and ultimately phased out, because it's almost inevitable, if not this time, if not the next time, if not in 100 years, but it's almost inevitable that something catastrophic, truly catastrophic, will happen. And the music of J.S. Bach and the literature of Russian and our language will be lost forever. And it's just a shocking thought that all of this is put into the hands of relatively few people. So anybody who has a knowledge of history and how it can go wrong must be deeply concerned at the current situation with the disproportionate use of power to achieve relatively insignificant objectives, namely to protect the Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, assuming that that is the bottom line of what Mr. Putin really wants to do.
Who knows what and I think he doesn't even know what he wants to do, but what do we know, really?
Make Russia great again.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll see how it ends up. I guess everyone's glued to the news. In terms of bringing it back to the legal sphere, because your area of expertise, of course, do you have a mentor? Did you ever have a mentor just in your time at law school, or someone during your career?
I suppose at law school, I could claim that Julius Stone, who was the professor of jurisprudence and international law at the University of Sydney, was a mentor. Of course, he was already a great academic and a very influential mind, and it seems a little impertinent of me to claim him as a mentor. He got to see me as chairman of the Law Reform Commission, and he was always very supportive. He picked me out as one of 2 or 3 people in our year in the law school at the University of Sydney who he thought would go places in the law. We know that because he kept notes on the students in all of his classes, and jurisprudence and international law were compulsory subjects. So his little card system, which he kept and preserved and has survived after his death, it had very insightful comments on people. And actually, you'll be interested in this. The matter that I used for my thesis, semi-thesis, for my LLM, Master of Laws by examinations, was the doctrine of Marx on the withering away of the state. and its practice in the Soviet Union today. This is what I wrote on in I think it was 1968. And essentially I came to the unremarkable conclusion that it was a false image in the Soviet Union. It claimed to be Marxist, and it was really more in the nature of a state religion. And but Julius Stone gave me that task for my thesis to work up in one of the books he wrote in the late 1960s on the future of the law. And one of the chapters was on the Marxist view of law. And that took us into the Marxist view that in the perfect communist state, the law would wither away and be replaced by some form of consensual rule of the proletariat, never very closely defined. So I was always very interested in those things. And your question was, who was my mentor? At university, Julius Stone. In legal practice, I probably would have to say Neville Wran. Neville Wran, like me, at the bar, did some compo cases. Now, people from the big commercial firms and the barristers from the big commercial cases tend to look down their noses at those cases, but they had lots of technicalities and they were classic factual elucidation cases. Some of them, not in the commission, but in the general courts of law, were fought out before juries, and some of them were fought out just before judges. And Neville did work with me, and that took me into industrial arbitration, and that took me to meet Lionel Murphy, who was a very close friend of Neville Wran. Wran went on to become the Premier of New South Wales, and Lionel Murphy went on to become the Attorney General under Whitlam, and subsequently a Justice of the High Court of Australia. And I would not have been appointed to the Law Reform Commission by Lionel Murphy, to the Court of Appeal by Neville Wran, and to the High Court of Australia by Paul Keating, if it had not been for meeting and working closely with Neville Wran and Lionel Murphy. I wasn't myself a member of the Labor Party or an active in politics. And for the life of me, I never quite understood what Lionel saw in me, because he was a great party goer and I was a party pooper. And for some reason, he liked me, probably because I was always a very hard worker. So, but those relationships ultimately proved very important in the opportunities that opened up for me. And it's like the Dead Poets Society, that movie by Peter Weir. When I saw the opportunities, I grasped them. You've got a carpe diem, as they said in that film. You've got to seize the day, and you've got to be ready to seize the day, and you've got to work your butt off in the law to be noticed and to achieve. It makes a big demand, but it can deliver a very rewarding, interesting, and sometimes powerful life.
Well, you said you had to work hard, and of course, like, you would have had to get to all the positions that you've been and continue to be at. What would you say an average day in your life, or your average hours were in your peak?
Well, the average hours begin at 6 a.m. and they finish at about 6:30 p.m. So it's quite a long day, and except for Thursday, with a lot of civilization, I spend every day doing that. And you know, a really big burden has come upon people like me by the internet, by emails, and now by Zoom links of this kind. And you can never get away from it. It's always there with obligations and things to be done. And I don't see that there's any solution to that. I've just got
Thursdays.
Maybe there'll be a sort of pseudo Thursday on Sunday or something else.
Half day Sundays. Like Sundays can be a new Thursday as well for half the day. Or maybe you just unplug the internet in your place. No Zoom will be sent.
Oh, but I get curious as to what emails have come in and what opportunities and what obligations. And even tonight, I stole a glance at the emails that had come in since 6:30. That's in a space of 2 hours. And there are a few very important emails.
I'm sure there would be.
Doesn't think any of them are important. And he threatens to pick up all my papers in my chambers and get a skip and send it all to the dump. But so far I've been able to ward off that. That would be a fate worse than death. I don't know.
Oh, well, maybe after this you'll have to have 2 Thursdays, maybe a Thursday, Friday. It'll have like a midweek weekend and then you can work Saturday and Sunday. Who knows?
Actually, if you'd been really original, you would have interviewed Young, because he's much more interesting than I am. He's not spilt the beans and engaged in a program like this, but he would have a very good insight, and it would be a very realistic insight into my life. And he is originally from the Netherlands, and the people from the Netherlands are very blunt. They're rather stubborn, but they're totally honest, which Anglo-Saxons are not. And he says, oh, you're all very, very polite. And then you stab people in the back. Now, I don't accept that, but he has really taught me to be much more honest. And that's
always a good thing. Well, now I have his email, so maybe in a few days I'll get him on next.
Oh, I don't think you'll have to think in terms of millions of dollars and mega production.
How did you?
He's always kept out of it. He doesn't like the idea and says he's not a public person and he doesn't want it. But anyway, I've been greatly blessed by my partner.
How did you meet your partner?
How did I get one? Are you seeking marriage guidance?
How did you meet your partner? Don't tell my girlfriend.
I met him at a gay bar, the Rex. It was one of the few gay bars in Sydney in 1969. And I'd been there, I think, once or twice before. And this was on a Tuesday night, and I went there and I saw this very handsome man. And when he talked to me, I thought, he's a German. I'll be able to practice my German because I studied German at school. Yeah. And I had a very good Sprachgefühl. And when I told him that I thought he was German, he was most insulted because
I was going to ask you that.
The people of the Netherlands don't really have at least people of our age don't have a deep and meaningful relationship with Germans. Yeah. But anyway, that's how we met, and he didn't actually come the following day, but on the Thursday of the same week, that's the second day, he turned up at my door in Kirribilli, where I was then living in Sydney, with his bags packed, ready to take over. And we've been together ever since. So it's a large matter, like everything, large matter of luck. And wow. I certainly struck gold.
Tell me if it's a bit private, but like, how do you balance your relationship with like you explained before, your work schedule? Because you're
Well,
obviously
the
busy
work,
schedule.
I mean, that is the truth of the matter. And as we've been together for 53 years, Jan understands that, and he's very supportive. And when I mentioned the possibility of a quasi Thursday on Sundays, he said, now don't rush this, because I think he started to realise that that would mean a big change in his life. And his life has been built around mine and mine around his. But you've got to be lucky in getting somebody who can put up with you in the good times and the bad times. And that is what Johan has done.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. Hopefully, my girlfriend will hopefully listen to this. She wanted me to tell you that she's a massive fan of you. She was freaking out for weeks when I told her that you were going to come on my podcast. So
well, I'm now going to give you a little bit of marriage counselling advice.
Girlfriend.
You've got to be ready to give in. You've got to be ready to apologise, even when you don't think you've done the wrong thing. You've got to be ready to say, I'm sorry, because if the love is there, or may grow to be there, then you've got to have the long haul, and the long haul will not come if people are rigid. So many relationships that we've known, straight and gay, have broken down because of an inability of somebody to say, I'm sorry. And so that's my bit of marriage guidance.
She's going to love you that much more now. She's going to love you that much more. That's good advice. Thank you, Michael. Can I ask? So you've had a vast array of positions internationally, domestically. Did you have one tenure that was your favorite, would you say, or were they all uniquely different?
Well, I think my work chairing the Commission of Inquiry on North Korea was undoubtedly the most important of the tasks I have. I was at a conference of statisticians in England when I was called to a phone to take a request that had come through from the High Commissioner for Human Rights, asking if I would be prepared to chair a commission of inquiry on North Korea. I didn't know any more about Korea than what one would read in The Economist and the London Review books and other literature on history, mainly. But I consulted my partner and ultimately said yes. And that led to a most interesting engagement, which was conducted in a very unusual way. When the United Nations was founded in 1945 in Lake Success in New York, it followed the Napoleonic system of administration. I'm talking about the internal administration of the UN. The first Secretary General was Trygve Lie from Norway, and the system was that of Napoleon. It was a very structured, highly centralised, rather secretive form of public administration, whereas the one that I had got used to was the English alternative, which has its faults in that it tends to be slow and it tends to be costly and it tends to be stratified, but it is more open and transparent. And so I said to my colleagues, we're dealing here with this highly secretive state. The best thing we can do is to have public hearings, to have the media present, to put the testimony we receive online immediately, to prepare transcripts of the testimony, to make that available to the whole world, and to have a readable report which quotes and uses the testimony of individuals to make concrete the crimes against humanity and other human rights abuses of North Korea. So that's what we did. My two colleagues, one was from Indonesia, which had had a Dutch administration, and the other from Serbia, who had had a German and before that French administration. And so they came from the civilian tradition, but they did agree to my diagnosis of what we had to do. And that is what we did. And I think largely because of this, when we produced our report to the Human Rights Council, it created a sensation because they'd never had an inquiry that had proceeded in quite this way. And I think that made it very difficult to ignore the report, although North Korea tried to ignore it by not engaging with it. But it produced votes in the Human Rights Council, in the General Assembly, and ultimately getting to the Security Council, which had only once before, in respect of Myanmar Burma, taken on a human rights issue of this kind. So I think in the methodology that we adopted, we were original and creative. In the report that we wrote, we were understandable and well illustrated by the individual cases. In the recommendations we made, we did not accept all of the submissions that we'd received, and we rejected a big submission that there was genocide in North Korea. And we did that for legal reasons. We strove to be independent, faithful to the Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the ICCPR. And in the end, we produced a good report. And unfortunately, Mr. Trump then came along and he thought he could get a deal with North Korea. And I don't think a deal was going to happen. But in the long and short is he would talk about security, but he would never talk about human rights. And you can't solve the problems of North Korea without talking about them both. And so I'll be watching very closely since the change of administration and the election of a new president in South Korea, Republic of Korea, to see how a more integrated approach may work in the case of Kim Jong-un, because it hasn't worked up to date. The problems are still very much as we described them in our report of 2014.
Out of curiosity, you said you got like testimonies from people. How do you actually source these people? Because I'm assuming they're out of North Korea. And how do you actually check? Is there a way to check their credibility? Or is it just fact, like cross-checking with other people?
That's a fair question. To make very great allegations of terrible wrongs, you have to be very clear in that the evidence supports it. And we were very conscious of that. The greater the wrong, in a sense, the greater must be the evidence to establish it. But we advertised in Korea, in South Korea. We couldn't have access to the media in North Korea, but we advertised and we were flooded with people. And the United Nations, because its tradition had been this Napoleonic one, they said, oh, we won't be able to protect you. There'll be security problems and there'll be people who are rat bags. They'll come in and they'll waste the time. But we said, we can handle all that. We'll look after that. And we did. And so in the end, we had to cut off the witnesses because we got so many, and our mandate was 9 points. And we therefore concentrated on using the witnesses to throw light on the 9 points. And where there was a chance, we would check witnesses against witnesses, or witnesses against known or objectively demonstrated evidence. That was as far as we could go without getting into North Korea. For example, in North Korea, they have denied that there are the detention camps where people who are thought to be enemies of the people or enemies of the regime are put with their families. It's a very cruel system, and they are often treated shamefully and not properly fed. And they deny that there are any such camps in North Korea. They say there are prisons, but there are not these gulags. But the problem in the world of Google Earth and of satellite imagery is you can actually get very close to the surface of the planet, and everywhere in the planet you can get to very high definition photographs of camps and other institutions, even down to cars and people. And so we didn't have any difficulty in tracking down the whereabouts of the camps, which the witnesses identified from the town that was close by. And there was mutual corroboration between witnesses who didn't know each other and who came from different parts of South Korea where they had settled. They had escaped mainly during the winter by crossing the ice over rivers, the Yalu and other rivers in the north, into China and getting on an escape line. Because if they could get to South Korea, they were entitled to citizenship of the Republic of Korea, and they were entitled to financial assistance and support. And so this is that was the source of our evidence. And at the end, when we were attacked by North Korea, we said, well, let us come in. And we've put this on on the website of the United Nations. And if you contend that anything is not right, let us see. And if you establish that we made a mistake in fact-finding, we will correct it. But you must understand that we just can't simply accept your denials. In Australia, I've been a judge, and when people deny things, well, sometimes you've got to get to the truth of the matter, and there are ways of doing that by getting witnesses before you who might not want to come before you. But we will come in and we will repair anything that is wrong. But of course, we were never invited. And I think that was the great strength of our report, that it told things through the words of people who had lived the experience, and it was not contradicted by North Korea, and therefore the record so stands. We even persuaded the government of the Republic of Korea to allow North Korea to appoint an agent who could present their case or cross-examine the witnesses. And that was a difficult thing for South Korea to agree to, because they have laws against terrorism, and they regard North Koreans as a form of terrorist political regime. So we offered them this unusual facility, but they refused, they denied. And not everything in our report was critical, and not everything was targeted at crimes against humanity and other grave crimes of human rights. We made a whole series of recommendations at the end of the report about a pathway to getting a reactivation of the relationship between North and South Korea. The roads lead to the demilitarized zone. The railway lines lead to the demilitarized zone. The country could relatively quickly get back to an integrated country. And if that happened, South Korea has shown itself to be a tremendously dynamic economy. And it's now, I think, the 8th strongest economy in the world. And North Korea, though it had a very weak command economy, breaking down, its very development of nuclear weapons and of missile delivery systems shows they've got some pretty clever scientists there. Mm-hmm. And if you were able to put the two Koreas together, where they share the same language and the same history and the same songs and the same poetry and all of that, it would be a mighty force in the world. I hope a force for good. But they're locked into this division that they never chose for themselves, that was imposed on them by Churchill and Roosevelt in Cairo in 1944, and they've been stuck with it ever since.
Do you get frustrated ever? Like, for example, with the report that you have given, you've gone, you've spoken to all these people. How long did it take you as part of that?
Well, it all had to be done within a year. We got the reference in May of 2013, and it had to be completed and presented to the Human Rights Council in March of 2014. Yeah. And all of this was done. It was brought in unanimously and within budget and on time. And I pay a tribute to my colleagues, Marzuki Darusman, the former Attorney General of Indonesia, and Sonia Basurko, a human rights worker from Serbia. We worked well together, and we were not a pushover. We didn't accept everything that was put to us, but we recorded our report, and it was, I think I can say, readable. For some reason, I can write, at least I can write English in a readable way. And I think the reason for that is I write as I speak in the Germanic language of the Anglo-Saxons. The trouble with English is that William the Conqueror brought over the Romance language from Latin and Europe. And so that's marvelous for poetry, but it leads to a lot of ambiguity, which of course is a godsend to lawyers. But our report was written in the very direct language, short sentences, clear expression of the Anglo-Saxons. And I think that was another reason why it created a sensation when it was presented to the Human Rights Council.
I'm reading a lot of your judgments and minorities as well in law school. I can definitely say you get that across, not to compared to other judges' judgments as well. I wanted to take it over to your time in the High Court. I just wanted to know, is there this frustration? Because generally, not often you're in the minority opinion, you're in the minority judgment. So the thing that you're really the outcome that you're wanting isn't achieved. So how do you come to terms with that, especially when you're with your colleagues trying to come to a conclusion and you don't get to persuade them?
Well, first of all, remember that though some have called me the great dissenter, I wasn't the great dissenter in the Law Reform Commission. I never dissented there. I wasn't the great dissenter in the Arbitration Commission or in the Federal Court, and I wasn't the great dissenter in the Court of Appeal of New South Wales. My level of dissent in the Court of Appeal of New South Wales was the same as that of Justice McHugh, because we both came to the High Court from there. So I'm not just a curmudgeonly old person who doesn't like agreeing with other people. And there was no dissent in the Korean report and no dissent in most of the United Nations, all of the United Nations reports that I've produced. So was it frustrating in the High Court? Yes, it was. But first of all, I'm a Democrat and I understand the rule of the majority. It's not all that difficult to work out in a group of 7 because it is 4. when I got to the High Court, Justice McHugh said to me, "This is the rule that governs this place, 4. And unless you can get 4, you haven't succeeded in getting over your view of the case." My problem was I couldn't get the 4, particularly as the years went on. I was appointed in 96 and I left in 2009. And they were basically the years of the Howard government. And a lot of good things were done for Australia in that time, but they were, and would be proud to say, they were a conservative government, quite conservative. And they appointed the justices of the High Court. And I do think coalition governments are much more strategic in their choice of judges than Labor Party. It's much easier for them. Most lawyers are conservative, much easier to find highly talented lawyers who are appointable and who see the world through the eyes of conservative values. And that's just not how I see the world. And that was known to Keating when he appointed me to the High Court. But it did have the consequence that other judges, when we came after the argument in a case to talk about a case, very quickly in the discussion, the difference emerged. And it's because of values. Values, deep values, can affect the way honest judges will find the solutions of different cases. And we'd be sitting there in the Chief Justice's chambers having a lovely cup of tea, and sometimes he would offer a biscuit. The difference would emerge. And I would always say, there it is, the San Andreas fault. The San Andreas fault has emerged, and that is the point of difference. And you won't agree with my view, and I am afraid, respectfully, I don't agree with your view, but because increasingly the judges of the court were appointments of the Howard government, they were quite conservative. They were totally honest, they were not corrupted, they were extremely good professionals, but they were conservative, and I wasn't conservative. So what do you expect me to do? Just to sign on and say, I agree, have a pleasant life and go out to a nice nosh up? That's not my personality at all. And so I've just had to work harder. You've got to work harder. If you write a separate opinion because you don't agree with the way others have reached it, even if you reach the same conclusion, and especially if you write a dissenting opinion, that is hard work. And you don't have to do it. You could, if you were not totally honest, you could just sign on and say, oh, well, I can't win them all, and content yourself with winning virtually none. Whereas now it is up to students of law and academics and people, citizens, to evaluate all these things. And one of the best things about this English transparency principle is, first, that you can dissent. In the Napoleonic system, you can't dissent. Judges can't dissent. And if you speak to judges of France, Germany, and so on, they think dissent is terrible. They don't agree with it at all. But it's at the very heart of the liberationist essence of English law that you can dissent, and if you disagree, it's your duty to do so and to explain why you do. And so my time could have been more pleasant, could have been easier if I had had the same values, but I didn't. And most of the time on the High Court, I was the only justice who had attended only public schools. Now, that is a weird thing, because in Australia, 67% of Australians go to the schools that are free, secular, and compulsory. right across our country in the 1860s, 70s, we established that system, secular, very important. Everyone, not the power of the purse of your parents or their religion, everyone. And I think that also contributed to my different values. So that was what it was. I don't complain. I didn't complain. I'm a Democrat and I'm a realist. So I just got on with revealing the San Andreas fault. Now it's up to students and practitioners and future judges, including future justices of the High Court, to decide whether I was onto a good point or not.
Did you ever struggle remaining objective, especially in such important decision like High Court cases where there's public spotlight?
Such as which case?
Workers' choice case, I was thinking of.
The work choices case.
Choices case, yeah.
No, I don't think. I mean, I was always very candid about the values because I thought that I owed it to the community and the legal profession and to my own conscience to explain the values that led me to a case. And sometimes they would be quite deep values of legal principle and history and context. In the work choices case, the government, the federal government, supported its legislation by reference to a constitutional interpretation that read the corporation's power without regard to a provision in the Constitution just a few paragraphs distant, which related to industrial arbitration. And I didn't agree with that, and that was an argument that was advanced by the advocate of Victoria. And interestingly, in that case, Justice Callanan agreed with my opinion. So did I go into the bathroom and sob deeply at the end of a day or at the end of a month? No, I didn't. I moved on to the next case. You're so busy that you don't have a lot of time to sit there and ponder on the injustice of the world, and your duty is to get on with the next case. And the High Court, not so much because of the big cases, which have actually declined in number because more things are being done on the papers, but in the administration of the role of the justice, sitting in all the special leave applications, interestingly, there wasn't generally much difference between us. We all had a nose for what was a case that was important, and therefore that was decided quickly, but we had a difference about how we would decide it, where it would take us. And they expressed, no doubt honestly, their conscientious opinion, and I expressed mine. And that's how the system is supposed to work. What is more surprising to me is that there were not more dissents from other judges, simply because you don't get into the High Court unless you get special leave most of the time. And that being the case, you would think that there would be more dissent from other judges, because it's the dissentable cases that get the special leave. Yeah. But there were not so many from other justices, and it hasn't increased much since, because number of judges have been appointed by the Abbott, Turnbull and Morrison governments, which who have been in some respects conservative. I don't think it's quite as conservative as it was in my day, but it's still a different world view. And it does affect the way you solve the problem.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. If you think that the problem is solved simply by looking at the Constitution, staring at its words, reading the words over and over again and hoping that inspiration will strike like a thunderbolt, it doesn't happen like that. You've got to reason from authority and from text and context, and that leaves what Julius Stone used to teach us were leeways for choice. And so long as a judge is not just giving a seat of the pants conclusion or giving the outcome according to their personal inclination or the tugging of their heart, but are giving a proper legal analysis, that's how our system works. And it's a human system, and it's made up of human actors, and they will have their strengths and weaknesses. But that was the system in which I had to work. I never complained about it. Chief Justice Mason once said, "The uncomplaining Michael Kirby." I never complained about it. I was grateful to have the opportunity to serve on the High Court. And when I finished, I went off and did entirely different things.
Yeah, exactly. You've been very generous with your time, Michael. I think I'd like to end just by asking if you had any advice for not just young lawyers, but just people entering their careers on how to get to the top of their career, really, or whatever they're choosing to spend their life in. Because obviously with your passion, you've done amazing things in your field.
Well, I think the first thing that I could say is to get into and to have and secure and keep a career. I gave a really brilliant webinar just a couple of weeks back for Victoria University in Melbourne, and it was how to do law exams, because I did pretty well in my academic career, both at school and in university, and I therefore thought I should share these secrets. And that webinar on how to write exam papers, scripts, would be online, and that would be worth having a look at. But once you get there and you've got your degree, I think the lesson that I've learned is that chance plays a very big and indeed inescapable part. That you have to be ready to seize chances that come your way unexpectedly. And sometimes it will lead to a dead end. And sometimes it will lead to unexpected opportunities. And that certainly was so in my own case. And finally, I think it's very important for a lawyer to be a joiner. I was always a joiner, in part because I was suppressing my sexual orientation, and at a time when it was illegal and stigmatized with so much hostility. I went into student politics, and I was the king of student politics. I was the president of the union, the president of the students, representative council, the fellow of the Senate representing the students, and so on. And then I went on to the big world, and I joined the Council for Civil Liberties. And I gave a lot of time as a pro bono lawyer for worthy causes, and many of them related to our First Nations people. And when I was at law school, I didn't ask enough, indeed I didn't ask any questions about the injustices that we heaped upon First Nations Australians and on people of different race by the White Australia policy, and on women by the discrimination against women and women's opportunities, least of all on gays and minority sexuality. So I would think if these features of my life have any guidance, it's because they're sort of universal features. There is a lot of chance in it. You've got to seize the day. You've got to succeed in your exams, and then in your career, you've got to be ready to work your guts out. Then you have the problem of adjusting for your love life and your personal life, and then be a joiner. Just in case you've got any time over, you've got to fill that up with civil society organisations that do good for people. And if you do all those things, you may get noticed and you may get opportunities. People can contribute to building the chances that represent future opportunities. And that is, at least in my case, what happened to me.
Well, I think that's a good point to end. Thank you so much, Michael. You were very generous with your time, and thank you for your career, I guess. I spent many hours reading your judgments in law textbooks, so thank you so much again. And I hope I didn't eat into your walk tonight, so I hope you enjoy your walk as well. Hopefully the weather's still all right. So thank you, Michael, for your time.
Thank you, Tone, and good luck to you. And don't forget the advice I gave you about giving in. When you become a High Court Justice, then that rule doesn't apply.
Don't give in.
In personal life, you have to be ready to recognise for the greater good that that is what you have to do to sustain a relationship. Okay?
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.